What makes a good tent? Google states a good tent should be durable, waterproof, easy to pitch and fit for your needs and camping style. You should consider factors like weather conditions, capacity and ease of use. But do we actually do that? Are these factors that we actually consider when we're looking for tents ourselves? Or do we just see a shiny new toy and think, I want that one? What factors are there that make us buy the tents that we buy? We see people on YouTube, people on Facebook, other social medias, our friends, our peers, they buy new tents. They say this is the next big thing and it influences our opinions on the tents that we want. Big ones for this are things like the X-Mid, the Targi 2, the OEX Fox. And now I'm not saying any of these tents are bad tents because none of them are, although you all know my opinion on the Fox, but that is personal opinion. But ultimately none of them are bad tents, but a lot of people buy them because other people buy them and because they're influenced. But what causes this influence? Why do people want to buy the tents that other people do? Well, a lot of that's exposure, and some of that is created naturally because the tents are just that good, and some are caused because there are companies out there that will give out freebies and tell YouTubers they have to give positive recommendations. Not all people do, but there are some out there that will recommend things based purely on the fact that a manufacturer that they work with have told them exactly what to say. Another thing that influences what we buy is the type of camping that we do. So those of us who love bad weather camping, love going out in the winter, they're more inclined to go and buy things like Hillebergs. But do you really need a Hilleberg? Is there other tents out there that will do exactly the same thing for a fraction of the cost? Is there any of us really that are going to take a tent of that quality to the limits that, or anywhere close to the limits of what it does? And probably not. And once again, that's partially influenced by people on YouTube and people on social media. And because it's nice to show off that you've got a tent that's way more expensive than everybody else's. And then on the flip side, you get people like what I'm more towards, which are your weight weenies, and we'll buy a tent because it's lighter and it may not be as robust and it may not stand up to the conditions as well, but saving that few grams and that few extra pounds means everything. This is where things like trekking pole tents come in, and some very popular trekking pole tents, and they're not going to stand up to the same conditions as a Hilleberg. But it's also where people turn to places like AliExpress, and I've done that recently, buying the Astagear Penguin, I think it's called, which Dill's now got, and that tent is ridiculously light at 600 grams, but it also don't fit in it. So for me, it was a waste of money, but I bought it because I was chasing them few grams. And I think these are things we need to consider when we're buying a new tent. I think that we also need to remember that what makes the perfect tent is very subjective to you and what you want. My need for my perfect tent may be completely different to yours. A big example of this is I've now switched back to two-man tents from one-man tents. But Dylan swears by living in a tiny little coffin. He couldn't think of anything worse than having all that extra space. And it's a small thing, but it's a very subjective thing. Materials on tents. There are a lot of people out there that would only buy steel poly tents, yet others will only buy steel nylon. For me, as long as it's waterproof, I don't really care. And to be fair, the best fabric I've found is the Ultra TNT. It's just very noisy. They all have the pluses, they all have the minuses. There is no one better fabric. It's all dependent on your circumstances, what you're willing to carry, and what you need. And also your budget. What should we be looking at for a tent? how should we gauge what is our personal perfect tent? Well, for that, I've broke it down into some key areas. And them key areas are peace of mind, weight, the ease of pitch, the size of the tent, the pack size of the tent, and ultimately your value for money. So I'll break them down into sections, I'll discuss what I mean between them all, and then see if you can use this principle to find your perfect tent. It's a peace of mind. So this is, how safe do you feel in your tent? How comfortable do you feel in your tent? Are you going out camping in conditions where you think your tent's going to fail, or do you feel your tent is robust enough that it's going to stand up to these conditions? Ultimately, you wouldn't attempt to take a trekking pole tent or a lightweight tent that's not very robust in very, very harsh winter conditions, because you're not going to feel that peace of mind and that security when you're out. Whereas you may take a heavier tent or a more robust tent in summer conditions, but be mindful, if that's got a solid inner, it's also not going to give you that peace of mind, because you're going to be stuck in a tent that's full of condensation, where you're too warm. For me, it's about that happy balance. If you can only have one tent, aim for something that's a half solid inner, maybe something with a slightly sturdier external pole structure, or that's at least outer pitch first, and go from there. If you're only summer camping, maybe go lighter, maybe have an inner pitch first tent, so you have the option to run without the fly if need be. And ultimately the opposite for the winter. If you feel you need a very robust, very strong 4-season tent because you're planning on camping only in snow and conditions like that, then that's what you should buy. But it should be based off the circumstances and your needs. And ultimately, if you don't feel safe, you're probably not going to have a good camp. Therefore, make sure that any tent you buy is going to give you that peace of mind. It's going to give you that feel of safety. I think a good example of this is my tarp tent. Absolutely love that tent, and for most summer times, that's the tent that I'm going to choose. But the one thing that really worries me about it is its lack of guy ropes and lack of even guying out points. For me, it's a lot of money for a tent that I don't always feel safe in. I now have tents that are a fraction of the cost, which are my go-to before that tent, and that's purely based off that peace of mind. Weight is a big factor. So what weight are you willing to carry? Some people are literally like mountain goats or Sherpas. They'll happily carry a 3, 4, 5 kilo tent up a hill. If that's you, and that's what you need for that peace of mind, then that's what you should take. If you're happy to carry the weight, carry it. If not, don't. But only carry the weight to your limits. And be mindful of this when buying your tent. If you're only buying a 4-season tent, if you're aiming towards the Hilleberg, expect to carry 2-3 kilos up a hill. My new tent is 2.5 kilos, my Saliwa Light Trek 2. On my last camp I was happy enough to carry this up a hill because I wanted to test it out, and I've got it for winter conditions, so it is used for the winter. But for the summer I'll be switching back to my lightweight tents and carrying less up. And I do say in my last video how much I do feel that extra probably kilo that's on that tent, because you do, and you have to take into account, especially with winter camping, you're also carrying a lot of extra heavy gear as well. Your pad's going to be heavier, your sleeping bag's going to be heavier, you'll probably carry more food with you. These all add up and it all adds extra kilos, so be mindful of that. But your weight does matter. Once again, if you can only have one tent, I'd aim for about the 2 kilo mark, because that should give you enough rigidity for light winter use, as well as enough lightness that it's easy enough to carry up in the summer. But also ensure that the 2 kilos that you're getting in that tent is 2 kilos well spent. There's no point in having a very big, robust fabric and then a rubbish pole structure, and vice versa. There's no point in having really good poles and a tent that's going to leak. But ultimately, the weight does matter. You do have to carry it, and you do have to keep that in mind. Ease of pitch. How easy is that tent to put up? And that doesn't just go for putting up in perfect conditions like today with no wind, lovely blue skies, in a nice flat golf course like what I'm on now, or an ex-golf course. I'm talking, how easy is that tent going to be to pitch on top of a mountain or on top of a big hill in even just as little as 10-15 mile an hour winds, with rain pelting down on you? Look at your extremes. How easy is that tent going to be to pitch? Has it got a complicated pole structure? Has it got 22 guy out points? Is it a tent that's even possible to pitch one person? Because some of them are very, very difficult on your own. Do you know how to pitch that tent? Have you pitched it before? Because that's also important. You don't want to get up there, realise the bit's missing, or alternatively, you don't know how to pitch it. Are your pegs up to standard? Are they going to hold? Are they going to stay in all night? Think of your extremes. Think of your what ifs. What you're going to do in worst case scenario if you don't have any other option. How easy is that tent to get down? How quick is it to put down? How quick is it to put up? Is it easy to pack away in its bag? All these are important. You've got to think about these things. You've got to think, if you've got to get out in an emergency, you've got to take that tent with you. You've got to take it down. That's your prized possession. And if it's a faff to get down, then maybe don't buy it. Same with putting it up. If you're going to get to camp and you've got an any pitch first tent that's going to take you 45 minutes to pitch, and by the time you've pitched it, your entire inner's wet and soaked through, maybe don't buy that tent for winter use. Take it for summer. And the same again goes for your big heavier tents. Some winter tents with your extra poles and your extra guy out points can take a long time to pitch, and it can be a lot of effort. And if you're there in the summer and it's blistering hot and you've just carried this extra 2 kilos on your back because you took a winter tent with you, last thing you want when you get there is to have to spend an age putting up your big rugged ridiculous tent, so then when you get in it, it'd be baking hot. Some very complicated tents, if you know how to pitch it, are no longer complicated. So it's all dependent on what you're used to and what you know, but make sure you know your tent well. Make sure you know how to pitch it. You don't want something too difficult, but ultimately don't save on that. You get something very easy to pitch that's not going to be rugged enough. The size of your tent. Now, why is this important? Well, I've already touched on it briefly. So for me, I've gone back to 2-man tents. I got to the point where, having slept in a 2-man tent all season last season, that when I did my first winter camp this year and I took my Robin Starlight one out, which is a tent I absolutely love, and if anybody is looking for the first ever 1-man tent, it's always a tent that I recommend. But I slept in that and had a miserable night. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy it, but it was a long time to be in a tent that was very, very small, very cramped, with no room at the sides of me. And I spent the whole night wishing that I took a 2-manner with me. You're looking only about 200 grams more for the 2-manner over the 1-manner. And for me, for that extra bit of space, that's perfect. But like I said, with Dylan, he's gone the other way. He loves a 1-man tent, and the smaller the better. His favourite tent he's ever owned has been the OEX Fox 1, a tent which personally I don't like. It gives me really bad anxiety when I get inside it because of how claustrophobic it is. But he will spend 18, 19 hours in that tent comfortably with the door shut. It's subjective to you, but it's important, because if you are Dylan and like a 1-man tent, putting him in a 3 or a 2-man tent is going to be awful for him. And likewise for me, if I go back to a 1-man tent now, I know I'm not going to enjoy my camp, and ultimately that's why we all go out. So if the gear that you've got isn't right for you, then don't use it. So you think about what tents you want. Go and try some out. There's plenty of camping shops out there. Even if you've not got any independent ones nearby, the likes of Go Outdoors, Decathlon, always have tents set up. You can go in, have a look, lie down, get your feel for them. Most 2-man tents are very similar sizes, as with most 1-man tents. The only difference you're going to get with a 1-man tent is the height. Your pack size, once again, very important. You can't fit your price tent inside your backpack, then who ain't camping. And obviously the more robust the tent you get, as a general rule, the bigger the pack size is going to be. But this isn't always the case. When I had one of my favourite tents I've ever had, which was my OEX Raccoon 2, I absolutely adore that tent. But it also packs the size of a house. It comes in 2 bags that both are bigger than any tent that I own now, including my winter tents. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know why it packs so big. It's not the most robust of tents. It's only 2 man, but its pack size is huge. And for that it means I have to take a bigger pack with me. And that for me is not ideal. It might be for you, but once again, why take something bigger if you don't have to? I do find to reduce your pack size generally, you have to go more expensive, but it's not always the case. My new 4-season tent, my Saliwa Electric Ultra, packs tiny. It's possibly even packs tinier than the tarp tent, which is half the weight. And part of that's down to the fact that the pole's fold to about this big. And that makes a big difference when you pack it down. Also, having a burrito bag helps. Also, if your tent's too big, you're more likely to put it on the outside of your pack. And if you're going wild camping, you want to be a little bit stealthy on the way up. You don't want everybody knowing you're going. And if you're carrying your tent and your sleep mat and everything on the outside of your pack, you may as well be walking around with a big glowing beacon above your head telling people what you're doing. So it's something to be mindful of, but it's not always a deal breaker. If you can only afford that tent at like £90 that's going to be really, really big, then that's the tent you buy. Pack size should be down the list of important things, because there is other ways that you can deal with it. As long as the other areas are covered, it's a niggle and it's somewhat small, but if you've got the money and the ability to get something smaller, I'd always advise it. And finally, and this is possibly one of the most important ones, your value for money or your price. And this is always the niggle with me. How companies like Hilleberg, Tarp Tent, and companies like that, even Durston, can charge the prices they charge for tents is beyond me. To be fair, with Durston, I do get it a little bit more. They're a lot smaller company, but the tents are still made in China. And I just don't understand how you can get a tent like my Saliwa for, I think I paid £180 for that stands up to ridiculous conditions, and I have tested it, and it didn't really budge. Yet Hilleberg is going to cost you upwards of £800-900, maybe even £1,000 plus. And don't get me wrong, by no means am I comparing the 2 tents, because I'm not. I know for a fact that Hilleberg will blow it out of the water, but it's not 5 times the tent. I'm not getting 5 times the features, and that's where my gripe comes in. And it's the same with my tarp tent, you know. I'm not calling people who spend a lot of money on tents. I've done it myself. My tarp tent, after paying import, set me back nearly £800. And I have tents that I choose over it. And it's not the be all and end all. And don't get me wrong, it has some absolutely phenomenal features and some phenomenal materials, and it's never ever going to leak, and nobody else has one, and it's so unique, but it's no better than tents that I've got at £200, or only marginally better, and it's so much more money that, is it really worth it? What is the value of that tent to you? And like I said before, do you need a Hilleberg? Are you ever going to take it anywhere close to its limits? And even if you are, should you be taking that risk? Should you be risking our mountain rescue teams if they've got to come out if and when it fails? And that does all come down to price. And I'm hoping somebody can enlighten me in this, but I just cannot see how they can justify charging £1,000 for a 2 or a 1 man tent. I just can't see it. It's a little piece of fabric and a couple of poles, and it's so much money, and I think that is something you need to take into account. And I think even at the lower end of things, like I said before, you can get some of these OEX tents, and one of my favourite tents of all time, like I've just said, is the Raccoon 2. And I think I paid about £70 for that tent. And I put it through hell, and it's been in storms with me, and it stood up, and it was £60 or £70. Now, for me, I think if you want to find what is the perfect tent, I understand that I've given you very much a politician's answer, but that's the answer to it. There isn't one. It's subjective to you. And I think to find out what that is, go through the points in this list, score the importance of them and where you are in it and what bits you want from each one. Work it out before looking at tents, what you actually want from them. And then once you've got them stats, once you know what price you're willing to pay, once you know what weight you're willing to carry, once you know what size you need, then at that point, go and look for a tent. Go then and see if you can find that tent that you want. Because then you know what your perfect tent is. And at that stage, that's when you'll find what you really want. So, like I said, is there a perfect tent out there? No. Is there a perfect tent for you out there? No. But using guides like this, can they make it closer to you? Quite possibly. And I think the reality is the perfect tent is 2 tents. One for the summer, one for the winter. Because that way you can have that balance of weight and size and comfort, your reassurance in that tent, and you feeling safe in it. If you really, really look at it, are you ever going to feel safe in that summer tent in the winter? And probably not. And are you ever going to feel comfortable in that winter tent in the summer? And the answer's probably not. So when you get down to it, there isn't that perfect tent. But hopefully this enlightens you a little bit. Hopefully it gets you a bit closer to some ideas and to what you actually want rather than what everybody else is using. And if I've missed any points, drop me a comment, let me know. If there's any tents that you know that are outside the box, that aren't what everybody else is using, that are brilliant, put a comment down, let others know. Don't go influencing people, but it gives them ideas to look at. And ultimately, do you. Don't do what everybody else is doing. That's for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider liking, subscribing, commenting, all the other shameful plug stuff, and I will catch you in the next one.